The old manor stood tall, surrounded by a dense forest that swallowed the last rays of sunlight. It was as if the trees were trying to conceal the grandeur of the estate. Emily, a young and ambitious journalist, stepped out of the car, her eyes fixed on the manor's facade. The wind whispered through the trees, creating an unsettling melody that sent shivers down her spine. She had been invited to spend a weekend at the manor by its owner, Mr. Edward Blackstone, to discuss a potential business deal. As Emily entered the manor, she was greeted by the warm smile of Mrs. White, the housekeeper. The interior was lavish, with ornate furnishings and priceless artwork adorning the walls. Emily felt a sense of excitement mixed with unease. She was accompanied by her colleagues, Matt, a photographer, and Dr. Lee, a psychologist, who had been invited to assess Mr. Blackstone's mental state. The group was also joined by Alex, a tech expert, tasked with evaluating the manor's security system. As they settled into their rooms, Emily couldn't help but notice the eerie atmosphere that lingered in the air. The creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath her feet seemed to echo through the corridors. She felt a presence watching her, but every time she turned around, there was no one there. Dinner was a formal affair, with Mr. Blackstone at the head of the table. He was a charismatic host, regaling the group with tales of his business ventures. However, Emily detected a hint of melancholy beneath his charming facade. As the night wore on, the conversation turned to the manor's history. Mr. Blackstone spoke of the family's dark past, of tragic accidents and untimely deaths. As the evening drew to a close, the group retired to the library for coffee. The room was dimly lit, with only a few candles illuminating the shelves lined with ancient tomes. Matt began to snap photos, while Dr. Lee engaged Mr. Blackstone in a conversation about his mental health. Emily wandered over to a shelf, running her fingers over the spines of the books. One title caught her eye: The Art of Dying. She felt a sudden chill as she opened the book, revealing illustrations of grotesque rituals. Alex, who had been examining the manor's security system, reported that it was state-of-the-art. But he had noticed some unusual footage on the cameras. The group gathered around him as he played the clips, showing strange shadows moving around the manor's perimeter. Mr. Blackstone dismissed it as a stray animal, but Emily sensed that there was more to it. The next morning, Emily decided to take a walk in the forest surrounding the manor. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtering through the trees created a dappled pattern on the ground. As she strolled deeper into the woods, she stumbled upon an old, overgrown path. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to follow it. The path twisted and turned, leading her further away from the manor. The trees seemed to grow taller and closer together, casting long, ominous shadows. Emily began to feel a growing sense of unease. She heard the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves, as if something was following her. Suddenly, the trees parted, and she found herself at the edge of a In the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its branches twisted into grotesque shapes. Emily approached the tree, feeling an inexplicable connection to it. As she reached out to touch its trunk, she felt a surge of visions. Images of people gathered around the tree, their faces contorted in a mixture of fear and ecstasy. The visions were fleeting, but they left her shaken. She turned to make her way back to the manor, but the path had vanished. The forest seemed to have shifted, and she was lost. As the day wore on, Emily failed to return for lunch. Matt, Dr. Lee, and Alex grew concerned, and a search party was formed. They scoured the forest, calling out Emily's name, but there was no response. Mr. Blackstone remained in the manor, seemingly unperturbed by Emily's disappearance. As night began to fall, the group reconvened in the library, their faces etched with worry. Dr. Lee suggested that Emily might have wandered off due to some psychological issue, but Matt was adamant that something was amiss. Alex reported that the security cameras had captured Emily entering the forest, but she was never seen leaving. As they pored over the footage, they noticed that the strange shadows from the previous night's footage were now surrounding the manor. The group exchanged uneasy glances. It was as if the forest was closing in. The next morning, the group decided to resume their search for Emily. They combed the forest, their voices hoarse from calling out her name. As they approached the clearing where Emily had encountered the ancient tree, they found her sitting at its base, her eyes vacant. At first, they thought she was in shock, but as they drew closer, they realized that she was catatonic. Dr. Lee attempted to rouse her, but Emily remained unresponsive. As they led her back to the manor, Emily's eyes flickered open, and she whispered a single word: ritual. Back in the manor, the group tried to piece together what had happened. Emily, still shaken, recounted her visions at the ancient tree. Matt and Alex began to investigate the manor's history, uncovering dark secrets about the Blackstone family's involvement in occult practices. Dr. Lee remained skeptical, but as he delved deeper into Mr. Blackstone's past, he discovered a disturbing pattern of mental instability. As night fell, the group gathered in the library, their nerves frayed. The shadows on the security footage seemed to be growing bolder, and the atmosphere in the manor was becoming increasingly oppressive. Emily, still recovering from her ordeal, reported hearing whispers in the night, urging her to join some unknown gathering. As they watched, the candles in the library began to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew colder, and the group felt a presence closing in around them. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. In the chaos that followed, the group became separated. Matt stumbled upon a hidden room deep in the manor, containing artifacts and relics associated with the occult. Dr. Lee discovered a series of cryptic journals belonging to Mr. Blackstone, detailing his descent into madness. As the night wore on, the group reconvened in the library, determined to confront Mr. Blackstone. They found him standing in the center of the room, his eyes black as coal. He revealed that he had been conducting a twisted ritual, using the manor as a hub for dark energies. The group realized that they were part of the ritual, and Emily's visions were a key component. As they tried to flee, the manor's doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The shadows on the security footage coalesced into dark, humanoid forms, which began to move towards the group. In the ensuing chaos, the group members were torn apart, never to be seen again. The manor was found abandoned, its secrets locked within its walls. The forest returned to its natural state, the ancient tree standing sentinel over the manor's dark history. The investigation that followed turned up nothing conclusive. The Blackstone estate was left to decay, a testament to the horrors that had taken place within its walls. Thanks for watching. See you in the next chilling story. Give this video a thumbs up if you love creepy tales. The small, secluded island of Ravenswood was shrouded in mystery. Thick fog rolled in off the sea, veiling the dense woods and crumbling mansions in an impenetrable mist. Dr. Sophia Ellis, a renowned paranormal investigator, stood at the edge of the island's rocky shore, her eyes scanning the eerie landscape. She had assembled a team of experts to explore the island's notorious Bellwood Mansion, rumored to be one of the most haunted locations in the country. Sophia's team included her as they ventured deeper into the island. The air grew thick with an unsettling energy. The sound of lapping waves against the shore created a constant, soothing melody, but it was punctuated by faint, unexplained whispers that sent shivers down Sophia's spine. She couldn't quite make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A soft, mournful sighing that seemed to emanate. Henry observed the team, noting their reactions to the strange atmosphere. Jack led the way, his boots crunching on the damp undergrowth. As night began to fall, they reached the crumbling entrance of Bellwood Mansion. The once grand estate loomed before them, its turrets and gargoyles reaching like skeletal fingers towards the moon. Sophia felt an intense sense of foreboding, but her curiosity propelled her forward. The interior of Bellwood Mansion was a labyrinth of decaying opulence. Cobwebs clung to chandeliers, and faded tapestries hung from the walls. Emily wandered the halls, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. She paused at a grand staircase, her eyes fixed on a portrait of the Bellwood family. In the kitchen, they found rusted cooking utensils and rotting food, as if the occupants had vanished mid-meal. In the bedrooms, they uncovered personal belongings, frozen in time. Henry became fascinated with the psychology of the Bellwood family, speculating about the events that led to their downfall. Meanwhile, Matt captured evidence of strange shadows on his camera. She felt a growing sense of unease, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Emily began to pick out words, phrases that spoke of loss and despair. The team gathered around her, transfixed as she relayed the messages. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around them, but they couldn't pinpoint the source. Sophia's unease turned to alarm. They were not alone on the island. The team's investigation led them deeper into the mansion, into a network of narrow corridors and hidden rooms. They discovered a door hidden behind a bookshelf, leading to a narrow stairway that descended into darkness. Jack hesitated, but Sophia's determination won out. They made their way down the stairs, their lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. At the bottom, they found a large, the air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the walls seemed to press in around them. In the center of the room, they discovered a large, ornate mirror. Emily approached it cautiously, sensing a powerful energy emanating from the glass. As she gazed into the mirror, Emily's eyes widened in horror. She beheld a vision of the Bellwood family, their faces twisted in agony. The image shifted, revealing a dark presence lurking behind them. Sophia watched, frozen, as Emily's expression contorted in a mixture of fear and sorrow. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled, like water disturbed by a thrown stone. The team stumbled back, shocked, as a dark shape emerged from the glass. It coalesced into a figure, tall and imposing. The team reeled as the figure began to take shape, its presence warping the air around it. Henry, ever the scientist, attempted to rationalize the phenomenon, but Sophia knew they were dealing with something beyond the realm of Emily, still transfixed by the mirror, seemed to be drawing the entity closer. Sophia grabbed her friend's arm, pulling her back. The entity's presence caused the environment around them to distort. The walls seemed to melt, like wax in a furnace. The air grew thick with an electric tension, and the sound of whispers became a deafening roar. Matt's camera captured the chaos, the images blurring as the very fabric of reality appeared to unravel. As the team stumbled back, the entity began to change. Its form shifted, becoming as they retreated from the mirror. The team stumbled upon a hidden archive room. Dusty files and records revealed the dark history of the Bellwood family. They had been involved in occult practices, delving into forbidden knowledge that had ultimately consumed them. Sophia pieced together the events that led to the family's downfall. They had attempted to summon an otherworldly entity, but the ritual had gone catastrophically wrong. The entity had taken hold, corrupting the family and driving them to madness. The whispers, Sophia realized, were the echoes of the family's despair, trapped between worlds. The team's discovery, they knew they had to escape the island, but the fog had grown thicker, making it impossible to navigate. Jack attempted to lead them back through the woods, but the mist seemed to shift, disorienting them. They became lost in the labyrinthine forest, the whispers growing louder, more menacing. Panic began to set in as the team realized they were trapped. The entity, still present, continued to manipulate their perceptions. Matt's camera captured images that made no sense, twisted, nightmarish visions that seemed to sear themselves into their minds. Emily became increasingly unhinged, her connection to the spirit world growing stronger. As they stumbled through the fog, the team began to fracture. Henry became detached, his scientific rationalism crumbling in the face of the unexplainable. Jack's rugged pragmatism gave way to desperation. Sophia struggled to keep her team together, but they were disintegrating before her eyes. The whispers grew to a cacophony, a maelstrom of sound that threatened to consume them. The team members began to disappear. Sophia stumbled through the fog, desperate to escape. She stumbled upon the old lighthouse on the island's edge, its tower reaching towards the moon like a skeletal finger. She climbed the creaking stairs, the whispers growing fainter with each step. At the top, she found a small, cramped room. The lantern's glass was shattered, but Sophia found a small, battery-powered radio. She turned it on, and a faint broadcast signal filled the air. A soothing voice spoke of calm seas and peaceful skies, a stark contrast to the horrors below. As Sophia listened, the whispers began to fade. The entity's presence receded, and the fog began to clear. She knew she had to escape, to get off the island before it was too late. Sophia made her way down the tower, the radio clutched in her hand as the darkness slowly receded. Sophia stumbled onto the mainland, the radio still clutched in her hand. She looked back at Ravenswood Island, the fog swirling around it like a living entity. The whispers were gone, replaced by an oppressive silence. As she watched, a figure emerged from the fog. It was Emily, her eyes vacant, her skin deathly pale. Sophia's heart sank. She had thought she was the last one left. Emily's presence was a grim reminder that some secrets were better left unspoken. Sophia turned to flee, but Emily's voice stopped her. Softly, she spoke a single word. Wait. Sophia turned back, and Emily's eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, they shared a deep understanding, a connection forged in the heart of terror. Then, Emily vanished. Sophia was left standing alone, the radio still broadcasting its soothing melody. She knew she had to tell the world about Ravenswood Island, about the horrors that lurked within. But as she turned to leave, she wondered, had she truly escaped? Or was she still trapped in the darkness? Thanks for watching. See you in the next chilling story. Give this video a thumbs up if you love creepy tales. The village of Ravenswood lay shrouded in a perpetual gloom, as if the sun never truly rose above the dense canopy of trees surrounding it. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the residents lived and died by the rhythms of nature. For Emily, a young journalist, Ravenswood was a curiosity, a place she had heard whispers about in hushed tones. She had arrived on a drizzly afternoon, her car winding down the narrow lane that led to the village center. Emily was greeted by the village elder, Mrs. Jenkins, a woman whose face seemed etched with the weight of years. Her eyes, a deep piercing brown, looked Emily up and down before nodding in approval. "Welcome, child," she said, her voice low and soothing. "We've been expecting you." Emily was taken aback. She had not announced her visit, but there was something about Mrs. Jenkins that put her at ease. As they walked through the village, Emily noticed the villagers watching her from their windows, their faces expressionless. The group of friends Emily had arranged to meet in Ravenswood had all arrived the previous night, drawn by rumors of strange occurrences in the village. There was Matt, a thrill-seeker always on the lookout for the next big adventure. Sarah, a psychology student fascinated by the human. That evening, the group gathered at the local inn, a cozy establishment that seemed to be the hub of village life. Over dinner, Jack regaled them with tales of Blackwood House, a mansion on the outskirts of the village, said to be the epicenter of the strange happenings. According to legend, Blackwood House was built. Emily listened intently, her mind racing with the possibilities. As they finished their meal, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at their table, her presence unannounced. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, warning them away from Blackwood House. "It's not a place for the living," she said, her eyes glinting with a knowing light. The night wore on, and the group retired to their rooms, the fire in the inn's hearth burning low. Outside, the darkness seemed to press in, the trees creaking and swaying in the wind. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she settled into bed, the sound of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl lulling her into a fitful sleep. The next morning, despite Mrs. Jenkins' warning, the group decided to explore Blackwood House. The mansion loomed before them, its facade a testament to neglect and decay. Ivy crawled up the walls, and the windows, once grand, now stared back like empty eyes. As they approached, a sudden gust of wind slammed the front door open, the sound echoing through the stillness. With flashlights in hand, the air inside was heavy with the scent of rot and decay. Cobwebs clung to the chandeliers, and the walls seemed to press in, making the space feel claustrophobic. Matt, ever the adventurer, led the way, his light casting eerie shadows on the walls. They explored room after room, each one filled with the remnants of a life long past. In the kitchen, they found evidence. A child's bed stood in the center, surrounded by toys and books. It was as if the occupant had simply vanished. Emily felt a chill as she picked up a small, leather-bound book. The pages were blank, except for a single entry: "They are coming for us." Suddenly, the air seemed colder, the shadows deepening. As they made their way back down, they began to feel a presence around them, an unseen force that watched their every move. Doors creaked open on their own, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridors. Though they were alone, Matt, back in the village, they gathered at the inn, recounting their experiences. Sarah tried to rationalize what they had felt, suggesting it was the power of suggestion, but Emily wasn't so sure. she felt that they had disturbed something, that Blackwood House was more than just an old, abandoned mansion. As they discussed their findings, Mrs. Jenkins appeared once more, her expression grave. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said, her voice low. "Now it's coming for you." That night, the group retired to their rooms, the tension between them palpable. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even in the safety of the inn. As she drifted off to sleep, she was awoken by a faint scratching at her door. She froze, her heart pounding as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. Throwing off the covers, she cautiously approached the door. But when she opened it, there was no one there. The corridor was empty, the only sound the creaking of the old inn. The next day, strange occurrences began to plague them. Matt reported finding strange symbols etched into the bark of the trees. Symbols. Sarah started experiencing vivid, disturbing dreams, full of shadowy figures and an overwhelming sense of dread. Jack became withdrawn, as if something was weighing heavily on his mind. Emily tried to keep them all together, to find a rational explanation for what was happening. But it was as night fell on Ravenswood, the group's cohesion began to fray. Matt, driven by a mix of fear and adrenaline, decided to confront whatever was happening head-on. He slipped out of the inn, determined to uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences. Emily, sensing his absence, followed him into the darkness. The village was bathed in an eerie, moonlit glow, the shadows cast by the trees seeming to move of their own accord. As they navigated the deserted lanes, they stumbled upon Matt, his eyes wild with fear. He had discovered a hidden glade, deep in the woods, where the symbols they had seen earlier were etched into the earth. Without a word, Matt pushed the door open, revealing a tunnel that descended into darkness. Emily hesitated, but Matt's fear had turned to determination. He stepped forward, disappearing into the darkness. Emily followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The air inside was cold and damp, the smell of earth and decay filling her nostrils. As they made their way deeper into the tunnel, the sound of scuttling, of something moving through the darkness, grew louder. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath them, and they tumbled into a vast, cavernous space. The ceiling lost in darkness, the room seemed to stretch on forever. And in the center, a figure, ancient and twisted, its presence seeming to fill the space. As they stumbled back to the inn, the darkness of the cavern still etched in their minds, they found the others in a state of panic. Sarah was catatonic, Jack missing. The inn was in disarray, as if a struggle had taken place. Mrs. Jenkins was there, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "You should have listened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now it's too late." In the days that followed, the group was torn apart. Matt vanished, never to be seen again. Sarah was left traumatized, her mind shattered by what she had experienced. Emily, the last one standing, tried to piece together what had happened, she realized that Blackwood House was just a symptom of a larger, darker legacy, one that had haunted Ravenswood for centuries. As Emily prepared to leave, Mrs. Jenkins handed her a small, leather-bound book. "It's the diary of the child whose room you found," she said. "Read it, and you'll understand." Emily took the book, her mind reeling with questions. As she drove away from Ravenswood, she felt a presence in the backseat. She glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was no one there. Thanks for watching. See you. The village of Ravenswood lay shrouded in a thick, impenetrable fog that seemed to cling to every surface like a damp, cold shroud. It was as if the very atmosphere itself was alive, and it watched with a malevolent presence as 5 friends, Alex, Emily, Matt, Sarah, and Jack, stepped off the last bus of the day and onto the deserted main street. The group had been friends since college, and they had decided to spend a weekend together in the countryside, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. Ravenswood was supposed to be a quaint, picturesque village, but as they looked around, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the soft dripping of water somewhere in the darkness. The fog swirled around their ankles, making it seem as though they were standing at the edge of a misty lake. As they made their way through the deserted streets, the only signs of life came from the faint, flickering lights in the windows of the old cottages. The villagers seemed to be hiding behind drawn curtains, watching the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The group had rented a large, old house on the outskirts of the village, and as they approached it, they noticed that it seemed to loom over them, its tall, Victorian facade seeming to lean in, as though it was listening to their every conversation. The house had been owned by an elderly couple, the Smiths, who had recently passed away, leaving the property to their niece, a recluse who lived in the city and had no interest in maintaining the old house. The group had been warned that the house was a bit rundown, but they had been assured that it was comfortable and would provide them with the perfect base for their weekend adventure. As they entered the musty hallway, a faint smell of decay wafted out, making Emily wrinkle her nose in distaste. Matt, ever the jokester, pretended to be a ghost, floating up the stairs with a blood-curdling scream, making the others laugh. But as they settled in, they began to feel a creeping sense of unease. It started with small things, a creaking floorboard, a faint scratching noise in the walls, a cold draft that seemed to seep from nowhere. They tried to brush it off as the old house settling, but deep down, they knew it was something more. As they explored the house, they stumbled upon an old, leather-bound book in the attic. It was filled with yellowed newspaper clippings and handwritten notes, detailing a dark history that seemed to be woven into the very fabric of Ravenswood. The legend spoke of a witch who had lived in the village in the 17th century and who had been brutally executed by the villagers. According to the story, witch had placed a curse on the village, condemning it to a lifetime of misfortune and tragedy. As they read on, they discovered that the curse was said to be triggered by a specific event: the arrival of outsiders in the village. The group exchanged nervous glances, wondering if they had inadvertently triggered the curse by coming to Ravenswood. The more they read, the more they became convinced that the strange occurrences in the house were connected to the legend. They began to feel like they were being watched, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive. Sarah, who had always been fascinated by the supernatural, became obsessed with the legend, scouring the book for more information. She discovered that the witch's name was Militia, and that she had been known for her beauty and her cruelty. According to the legend, Militia had been having an affair with a local lord who had eventually turned against her, leading to her execution. As Sarah read the story, she couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine. As night began to fall, the group decided to explore the village, hoping to gather more information about the legend and the curse. They wrapped up warm and stepped out into the fog, which seemed to have grown even thicker and more menacing. The streets were empty and silent, except for the sound of their own footsteps echoing off the buildings. They walked in a tight group, their flashlights casting flickering shadows on the ground. As they walked, they noticed that the fog seemed to be seeping into their bones, making their skin crawl. They could feel its dampness on their faces, and it seemed to be seeping into their lungs, making them cough. The darkness seemed to be coalescing around them, taking on a life of its own. They heard strange noises, the sound of footsteps behind them, the rustling of leaves, the creaking of branches. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but then they realized that the sounds were following them. As they turned a corner, they caught sight of a figure standing in the distance. It was tall and imposing, and it seemed to be watching them. The group froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there, watching them. Slowly, it began to move towards them, its pace slow and deliberate. The group turned and ran, not stopping until they were back in the safety of their rented house. Breathless and shaken, they locked the doors and windows, trying to convince themselves that it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But as they looked around, they realized that the atmosphere in the house had changed. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to be moving of their own accord. They tried to distract themselves by watching TV, but the static-filled screen seemed to be showing them something sinister. As they settled in for the night, Emily noticed that one of the mirrors in the hallway seemed to be reflecting an image that didn't belong to any of them. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, but as she looked closer, she realized that it was a shadowy figure standing just behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. When she turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. The others were skeptical, but as they took turns looking into the mirror, they began to see the figure too. It was always just out of sight, lurking just behind them. They tried to convince themselves that it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, they knew it was something more. The figure seemed to be watching them, waiting for them to make a wrong move. As the night wore on, the occurrences grew more frequent. They would see the figure out of the corner of their eye, only to turn and find no one there. They began to feel like they were losing their minds, and the tension in the house grew. Jack, who had always been the calm and rational one, began to crack under the pressure. He became withdrawn and isolated, refusing to leave his room. The next morning, the group decided to explore the village again, hoping to uncover more secrets about Ravenswood and the curse. They visited the local church, where they met the vicar, a kind-eyed old man who seemed to know more than he was letting on. He told them that the village had a dark history, and that the curse was just the tip of the iceberg. He hinted that there were things that lurked in the shadows, things that didn't take kindly to outsiders. As they left the church, they noticed that the fog had lifted, revealing a village that was even more sinister than they had initially thought. The buildings seemed to loom over them, casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. They walked through the village, taking in the eerie atmosphere, and stumbled upon an old, abandoned well. As they peered into its depths, they saw something that made their blood run cold. At the bottom of the well, they saw a piece of cloth caught in the rusty old machinery. It was a piece of fabric that seemed to match the dress that Malicia, the witch, was said to have worn. The group exchanged horrified glances, realizing that the legend was more than just a story. They knew that they had to get out of Ravenswood, but as they turned to leave, they realized that their car was gone. Panic set in as they realized that they were trapped in Ravenswood. They tried to call for help, but their phones had no signal. The village seemed to be cut off from the outside world, and they were at the mercy of the sinister forces that lurked in the shadows. As they tried to make sense of what was happening, they heard the sound of footsteps outside the house. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps, and they seemed to be coming from all directions. The group huddled together, waiting for whatever was coming their way. The footsteps stopped outside the front door, and there was a moment of silence. Then, the door creaked open, and a figure loomed in the doorway. It was the same figure they had seen in the fog, and it seemed to be watching them with a malevolent intensity. As the figure moved closer, they saw that it was a woman, her face twisted with a malevolent grin. She was dressed in a long, flowing gown, and her eyes seemed to be burning with an inner fire. The group froze, paralyzed with fear, as the woman began to speak. Her voice was low and husky, and it seemed to be dripping with malice. The woman's voice was like nothing they had ever heard before. It was as though she was speaking from the very depths of hell, and her words seemed to be laced with a dark, malevolent power. She spoke of the curse and of the suffering that Ravenswood had endured. She spoke of Malicia and of the wrongs that had been done to her. As she spoke, the group felt a creeping sense of dread. They knew that they were in the presence of something ancient, something evil. The woman's words seemed to be weaving a spell around them, drawing them into a world of darkness and terror. One by one, they began to fall under her spell, their minds consumed by a growing sense of madness. In the end, it was just Alex who was left standing, his mind reeling with the horror of what he had witnessed. The others were gone, consumed by the curse, and he was left alone to face the darkness. As he stumbled through the fog, he realized that he was back at the old well. The woman was standing beside him, her eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. As Alex looked into the well, he saw the faces of his friends staring back at him. They were trapped, their eyes black as coal, their skin deathly pale. The woman's voice whispered in his ear, telling him that he was the last one left, and that he would soon join the others. And as he looked into the well, he knew that he was doomed. The last thing Alex saw was the woman's face, her eyes blazing with a malevolent fury. And then, everything went black. The fog closed in around him, and he was gone. The trees loomed over the winding road, their branches tangling together like skeletal fingers. Emily gazed out the car window as the dense forest seemed to swallow the fading light of day. She shivered, despite the warmth emanating from the vents. The GPS led her friends deeper into the woods, farther from civilization. They were on their way to Blackwood, a remote cabin her friend Matt had rented for a week-long retreat. Emily's friends, Matt, Sarah, Jack, and Daniel, chatted and laughed, their excitement palpable. They had been friends since college and always made it a point to take a trip together every year. This year, they had decided on a secluded getaway to disconnect from their busy lives. As the trees grew closer together, the conversation turned to the history of the area. Matt mentioned the local legend of a family that had lived in the woods, their fate unknown. The darkness outside seemed to press in on the car, making Emily feel claustrophobic. She turned up the radio, but the signal was weak and distorted. Static filled the car, and Emily turned it off, plunging them into silence. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. As they rounded a bend, a faint light appeared in the distance. The cabin. As they pulled up, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. The cabin was cozy, with a porch that wrapped around the front. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, and a warm golden light spilled from the windows. Matt killed the engine, and they piled out, stretching their stiff limbs. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine. They grabbed their bags and followed Matt to the door. Inside, the cabin was just as inviting. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her as she explored the cabin. The others were busy unpacking and settling in. As night began to fall, they gathered around the fire, swapping stories and sharing laughter. The night air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Emily stepped outside onto the porch, feeling the wooden slats creak beneath her feet. The darkness seemed to vibrate with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. She breathed deeply, feeling the stress of the past week melt away. The others were still inside, engrossed in a game of cards. As she stood there, a faint rustling caught her attention. She turned, peering into the darkness. The trees seemed to loom closer, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She called out, her voice soft, but there was no response. Shrugging it off, she turned to go back inside. As she reached for the door, a twig snapped behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing. The forest was silent, as if holding its breath. Emily's heart beat faster. She stepped back inside, shutting the door behind her. The warmth and laughter enveloped her, chasing away the unease. They decided to call it a night, exhausted from their drive. As they settled into their beds, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest. The creaks and groans of the old cabin seemed to take on a sinister tone. She drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of the forest and its secrets. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of birds chirping outside. She stretched, feeling refreshed. The others were already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of bacon and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. They ate together, discussing their plans for the day. Matt suggested a hike through the woods to explore the surrounding area. As they set out, the sun was shining, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The air was filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. They walked for hours, the terrain growing increasingly rugged. The trees grew taller, their canopies overhead filtering the sunlight. They came across a clearing, and in the center, a dilapidated cabin stood. The cabin was old, its wooden slats weathered to a soft gray. The roof was partially collapsed, and vines crawled up the walls. Emily felt a sense of curiosity. Who had lived here, and why had they left? Matt, ever the adventurer, pushed open the creaking door. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of decay. As they explored the cabin, they found signs of a hasty departure. Furniture was overturned, and clothes were scattered across the floor. In the kitchen, they found a journal belonging to a woman named Elizabeth. As they flipped through the pages, they discovered that Elizabeth had lived in the cabin with her family. She wrote about the isolation, the feeling of being watched, and the strange occurrences that had driven them to the brink of madness. As they read on, the atmosphere in the cabin grew thick with unease. Emily felt a presence closing in around them. She glanced around, but the others were engrossed in the journal. The trees outside seemed to loom closer, their branches tapping against the windows. Emily shuddered, feeling a chill run down her spine. Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. She had a feeling that they were being watched, that something was waiting for them outside. Matt dismissed her concerns, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. As they left the cabin, the forest seemed to press in around them. The walk back was tense, the silence between them heavy. Emily kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. When they arrived back at their cabin, they were greeted by an unsettling sight. The door was open, and the fire had been extinguished. It looked as though someone had been inside. Panic set in as they searched the cabin. Their belongings were scattered, and it was clear that someone had been rummaging through their things. Emily felt a growing sense of dread. Who could have done this, and why? They searched the surrounding area, but there was no sign of anyone. As night began to fall, they huddled together, trying to make sense of what had happened. Daniel suggested that they might have been burglarized, but Matt was skeptical. They decided to stay up, taking turns keeping watch. As the hours ticked by, the tension grew. Emily took the first watch, sitting by the fire. The darkness outside seemed to press in on her, making her feel claustrophobic. She listened to the sounds of the forest, her senses on high alert. As the night wore on, she began to feel a creeping sense of unease. It started as a tingling in her fingers, spreading to her toes. As the night wore on, Emily's unease turned to terror. She heard footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate. The others were asleep, oblivious to the danger. Emily tried to wake them, but they were too groggy to respond. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The door creaked open, and a figure loomed in the entrance. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure stepped inside, its presence filling the room. It was Elizabeth, the woman from the journal. Her eyes were black as coal, and her skin was deathly pale. Elizabeth's presence was accompanied by an unholy stench, a mix of rot and decay. Emily gagged, trying to process what she was seeing. Elizabeth began to speak, her voice low and menacing. She told them that they had disturbed a dark presence, one that had been awakened by their meddling. As Elizabeth's words hung in the air, the others began to stir. They were confused, disoriented. Emily tried to warn them, but they were too slow to react. Elizabeth reached out, her bony fingers grasping for them. The others screamed, as Elizabeth's touch seemed to drain the life from their bodies. In the end, Emily was the only one left. She stumbled out of the cabin into the darkness of the forest. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches tangling together like skeletal fingers. She ran, the darkness swallowing her whole. As she stumbled through the forest, Emily realized that she was lost. The trees seemed to shift and twist around her, making it impossible to find her way back. She was alone, surrounded by the oppressive silence of the woods. The last thing Emily remembered was the feeling of being watched, the presence of something lurking just out of sight. And then there was nothing. The trees surrounding Blackwood House creaked and swayed in the wind, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching towards the sky. The once grand estate loomed before Emily, its facade shrouded in a tangled web of ivy and shadows. As she stepped out of the car, a chill ran down her spine despite the warmth of the summer evening. She had been invited to spend a week at Blackwood House by its owner, Henry, an old friend of her family's. Henry had assured her that the house was the perfect place to escape the stress of her daily life and focus on her writing. As Emily stretched her legs and took in the scenery, her friends, Matt, Sarah, and Jack, began to unload the luggage. Matt, ever the jokester, made light of the eerie atmosphere, teasing Emily about being a city girl afraid of a little darkness. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed a bit uneasy, her eyes scanning the overgrown gardens with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Jack, the quiet one of the group, simply observed the house with an intensity that made Emily wonder what he was thinking. The group made their way into the house, their footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. Inside, Blackwood House was just as imposing as it was from the outside, with cobweb-covered portraits and faded tapestries adorning the walls. Henry greeted them warmly, explaining that the house had been in his family for generations. As they settled in, Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. Dinner was a lively affair, with Henry regaling them with stories of Blackwood House's history. The atmosphere was convivial, but Emily noticed that the conversation seemed to steer clear of anything too personal or recent. After dinner, they retired to the library for coffee and liqueurs. The room was cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth, but Emily found herself glancing around, feeling that something was off. As the night wore on, they decided to explore the house. The darkness outside seemed to press in around them, making the flickering candles in the hallways cast eerie shadows on the walls. They discovered a room that seemed frozen in time, with antique furniture and old trinkets scattered about. In the center of the room, a beautiful antique music box sat on a dusty table, its delicate ballerina twirling to a haunting melody. Sarah, ever the romantic, was enchanted by the music box, but Jack seemed disturbed, his eyes fixed on something beyond the group. Matt, ever curious, began to investigate the room, opening drawers and examining the contents. Emily felt a growing sense of unease as they explored, as if they were trespassing on private memories. That night, Emily woke to the sound of footsteps outside her room. She lay still, listening as the steps creaked down the hallway, fading into the distance. She tried to convince herself it was just one of her friends getting a glass of water, but the sound had seemed too deliberate, too purposeful. Throwing off the covers, she got out of bed and padded to the door, pressing her ear against it. The house was quiet, the only sound the distant hooting of an owl. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as she wondered if she had really heard footsteps at all. She opened the door and peeked out into the dark hallway, calling out softly to see if anyone was awake. There was no response. As she stood there, the music box melody floated up from downstairs, its haunting tune sending a chill down her spine. She decided to investigate, making her way down to the room where they had found the music box. The room was empty, but the music box was still playing, its delicate ballerina twirling to the haunting melody. Emily felt a presence behind her and spun around, but there was no one there. The next day, the group decided to explore the gardens. The sun was shining, and the atmosphere was much more relaxed. Henry joined them, pointing out various features of the garden, including a beautiful old pond. Matt, being the thrill seeker, decided to test the ice on the pond, much to Henry's dismay. As they walked through the gardens, Emily noticed that the atmosphere seemed to shift, the air growing thick with an unsettling energy. Sarah began to act strangely, wandering off the path and into the underbrush. Jack followed her, his expression concerned. Emily and Matt continued on with Henry, who was telling them about the history of the garden. They came across a clearing, and in the center, a large stone statue loomed, its face worn by time. Emily felt a jolt of fear as she realized that the statue seemed to be watching them. Henry explained that the statue was a family heirloom, but his voice was tinged with a hint of sadness. As the day drew to a close, the group decided to spend the evening in the library again. Jack produced a book he had found in one of the rooms, its cover old and worn. As they flipped through its yellowed pages, they discovered that it was the diary of a young girl who had lived in Blackwood House decades ago. The diary spoke of strange occurrences and an unseen presence that haunted the house. Emily felt a growing sense of unease as they read, the words on the page seeming to echo their own experiences. Matt, ever skeptical, dismissed the diary as mere fantasy, but the others were not so sure. As they read on, they came across a passage that made Emily's blood run cold. The girl had written about a presence that had taken one of her friends, pulling them into the darkness. Emily looked around the room, feeling that they were being watched. That night, Emily woke to the sound of whispers. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, as the whispers seemed to come from all around her. She threw off the covers and got out of bed, making her way to the door. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they had started. Emily opened the door and peeked out into the dark hallway. The house was silent, but she could feel a presence lurking just out of sight. She decided to check on her friends, making her way to their rooms. Matt's room was empty, but she found Sarah huddled under the covers, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah told Emily that she had seen Matt being pulled away by some unseen force. Emily tried to reassure her that Matt was probably just out for a walk. But as they searched the house, they realized that Matt was nowhere to be found. As the night wore on, Emily and the others searched the house from top to bottom, but there was no sign of Matt. Henry seemed genuinely concerned, but Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that he was hiding something. It wasn't until they stumbled upon an old, hidden room deep in the basement that they began to uncover the truth. Inside, they found a series of old diaries and letters detailing a dark history of Blackwood House. The family had made a pact with a malevolent force, trading their sanity for wealth and power. The presence that had haunted the house for generations was a manifestation of their dark deeds. Emily realized that they had been foolish to come to Blackwood House. To think that they could escape the darkness that lurked within its walls. As they prepared to leave, Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. But as they stepped out into the bright sunlight, she realized that something was off. The trees seemed to loom over them, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Henry handed Emily a small package as they said their goodbyes. Inside, she found the antique music box, its delicate ballerina still twirling to the haunting melody. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that she was now a part of Blackwood House's dark legacy. Like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel.